Hey, good morning. So we are in Romans 1:13. I'm really enjoying this study. I hope you are too. So here we go. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. So Romans 1:13, it marks this transition in Paul's introduction. So after Paul expressing the desire to visit the believers in Rome, verses 10 through 12, he now explains, why he has not yet arrived. So it's not, Paul's like, look, it's not because I don't love you. It's because God has directed my ministry elsewhere. So this, again, he's a pastor and he has this deep pastoral heart, but he has this submission toward these people, but he has this submission to God's timing. And he just wants to see fruit amongst the Gentiles. So he doesn't, he has desires of ministry, and he has these desires of ministry, but he, just submits to God's will, right? So he's like, I do not want you to be unaware. This word, it's agno. Just where we get our word agnostic. So it's I don't want you to be ignorant. I want you to. I'm keeping you informed here of what's going on. So, and he uses his terms a lot in other verses in the scripture, and he calls them brothers. This word Adelphoi, Philadelphia, this root word for brother, like the city of like Adelphi. And he's, these are not his genetic brothers, but his spiritual brothers. And he says, I've often intended to come to you. So he repeatedly planned to visit Rome. It, had been his consistent desire for years. Romans 15 reveals more about these plans. He wanted to, encourage them, enjoy their fellowship, preach Christ, and then eventually use Rome as a launching point for ministry in Spain. Romans 15:24 talks about this. And, Rome was the center of the Gentile world. So Paul longed to preach the gospel from its capital. I personally, I've had some ministry desires, deep desires to help some organizations, and just that it's been blocked, and I've been frustrated. But verses like this, it's, I think one day, like this one organization, I really have a deep desire to help, but I'm just blocked. And one day I do believe I'm going to be able to help them get to where they need to be. Next phrase, but thus far have been prevented, held back, restrained. So it's a passive voice. So it's things outside of Paul's control. Scripture identifies a couple different reasons. So, ministry of priorities, right? Romans 15:20-22, Paul's been preaching the gospel elsewhere, and, where Christ has not been named yet, unreached people groups. So that the missionary strategy delayed the visit. God's providence, every good plan must yield God's timing. As long as you're praying, you have a heart, I've learned not to force things. If it comes from me, it goes nowhere, or maybe it does go somewhere, but it's all because of me. And it's a very temporary type of thing. And there's spiritual opposition. Sometimes the delay is a result of spiritual warfare. But, not every closed door is of Satan. Sometimes, and not every delay is of God's disapproval. So, sometimes God has a different thing. Center for Pastoral Development came out of nowhere. Finally getting to use my master's degree in discipleship. Got some really exciting candidates, great testimonies. I'm really excited about some of the guys that are going to be going through it next year. So, Paul waited years before coming to Rome, but he came as a prisoner. Next phrase is in order that, right? So he's saying, okay, in order that, there's a purpose to this. I may reap some harvest. He wants to come there to reap some harvest. Paul talks constantly about fruit, right? 1 Corinthians 3:6. He's like, yeah, I planted, Apollos watered, God, was the one who made it grow. In the harvest, it's new converts, it's spiritual growth, it's gospel expansion, more churches planted, increased faithfulness, lives being transformed. And, Paul, again, in Romans 6, Romans 7, Romans 15, he talks about spiritual fruit. I guess, I don't know, I got a garden growing. I guess Paul was into fruit. Just like Christ was into, like this concept of sheep. So among you. So the next phrase, among you. So Paul expected fruit, even in a church that he did not plant. He didn't view these churches as his. Everything belonged to Christ. And then this next phrase, as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. So this word for Gentiles, ethne, it's nations or Gentiles. This is Paul's commission, Acts 9:15, right? He was a chosen instrument to carry Christ's name before the Gentiles. And, Roman church was largely Gentile because the Jews were kicked out, and then they did come back, and that caused some trouble because of kind of like their understanding of, like Christianity and how it had to do with the law. And, they were trying to bring the law into grace, which didn't mix. Paul was constantly, kind of battling that. So look, I mean, Paul had this unwavering desire to minister in Rome and see spiritual fruit. So he, repeatedly planned to visit, but God, providentially delayed his visit. And, just this teaches that faithful ministry requires patience. It requires submission to God's sovereign direction, his timing, and just a passion to see lives transformed by the gospel. Just reminds us that God's delays are often, preparations for greater opportunities. And, God's purposes are going to be accomplished according to his perfect will, perfect timing, rather than our own. Anyway, have a great day. God bless.